Miller, our wonderful minister here every time.
Thank you, my dear. I'm going to put up the footstool. Because then I can see you all better. Is that a good place for the mic? Good, 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 good. I'm glad. Oh, my goodness. What a week. What a year. Actually, what a couple of years, really, right? As things unfolded and shifted and changed. And, you know, as human beings, we tend to think we would like everything to stay really just nice, the way it was at a particular point. I remember when I had my first house with a garden. I had worked in gardens before, but I'd never had a garden. And so I went through, and there were miles of English ivy and morning glory roots. And I cleared those roots out, and I was very proud of myself. And I planted some perennials and a couple of semi-annuals like pansies and stuff. And I was done, I thought. And 6 weeks later, I'm out there again. It was my first realization of that tendency to think, well, now I'm done, and now I can look at other things, right? Instead of, oh, nothing in life ever stays the same. Nothing. Because if it's alive, it is changing. That's how we know it's alive, right? Oh, changing, always, and sometimes in surprising ways. Guess what? Now, many of you have heard me do we have been in an empire culture for 6,000 years, and we have a values in empire culture of acquire, accumulate, and control. What the UUs have stood for is an indigenous set of values that have to do with harmonizing and respecting and appreciating, right? And working together and connecting. But we are within this larger culture that is dying around us as we watch. The concept of empire no longer is possible on this planet. The concept of going out and taking what I want just because I want it is not possible in the large scale anymore. So, we get to watch empire culture shift and change and fall apart. And some of the qualities or constitutional pieces of empire culture is institutions. Before the first man got up and said, I'm in charge, you do this, and you do this, 6,000 years ago, plus or minus a few hundred, nobody ever did that. Nobody would think that they could tell anyone else what to do. For 200,000 to maybe 2 million years before, this is a glitch, a really tiny glitch in human history. And we are watching it fall apart around us. And it isn't fun. Not fun at all. About, 250 years ago, almost exactly, because we're coming into 2025, a bunch of guys who one of the greatest historians of our era, of our generation, Barbara Tuchman, called the most highly educated group of men ever to come together in Western culture, got together in Philadelphia, and with very hard relational work, put together some papers that established the first major alternative to empire in 6,000 years. And we call that the Democratic Republic. And Benjamin said, "We gave you a republic." Exactly, if you can keep it. And Jefferson said, you need to be educated to be able to hold together a democracy. And education was not just reading, writing, and arithmetic, it was also reasoning. And that got lost. Now, the upside is, over the next 75 years, that model of a democratic republic became the norm throughout Western culture, throughout Europe, and many of the Americas. Wow. There was an alternative to a single person telling us what to do. We flipped it from top down to bottom up. But we didn't know how to keep it. We didn't know what we needed to know to be able to have that become the norm. And I think part of the reason is because that's not how human beings evolved, not even the Democratic Republic. How we evolved was in communities of people who were in mutual support and each did a little bit of everything. And a few did a little more of what they were particularly gifted at, and nobody was in charge of anything. And in fact, that's one of the things that I'm holding as a vision for my current teenage grandchildren's grandchildren. Their grandchildren will never have heard, "Who's in charge here?" That's pretty profound. Now, we have, as a nation, become undereducated and under-aware, if you will. We have gone unconscious, in large part because of the work of what we used to call Madison Avenue. Marketing, advertising, brainwashing, hypnotic trances have been the norm for 75 years. That's 3 generations. 75 years is what happens in our culture, what it takes in our culture for an idea to become everywhere. And that's what happened. Now we have a culture, and it has spread to the rest of the world, where everyone who has access to media is in the hypnotic trance of advertising. Ow. And that's why this election happened the way it did. Many of you know that I'm part of a little shop up in Walport. We are the local do everything you need shop. We print, we fax, we copy, we have the piece you need, we fix your cell phone, we fix your computer, we have extras if yours doesn't work for a little while, we have books, we have videos, we have how-tos, and everyone associated with it is a counselor by training. It's a fascinating place to be, I gotta tell you. And it's the only thing like it for 20 miles either direction. So everybody comes in, and some of them are wearing MAGA hats, and some of them are wearing coexist buttons. And everyone feels safe in our shop, which is fascinating to me. By being committed to the well-being of the individual, we have managed to be a place where it doesn't matter what your politics are, and you can get what you need and feel safe. That's how humanity has evolved. That's who and what we are. Yes? Yes. This fellowship is how humanity has become. We live from the heart and we see to the core. And we don't pay that much attention to those funny little idiosyncrasies that make us unique. When I was in graduate school, I got to know some folks who were working in England, and we were studying cybernetics, which is odd. And one of the great men in cybernetics lived in a cave and wore old cotton, hand-woven cotton shawls and shirts and things. And the child of one of my colleagues, when having met this guy, said, "Are all cyberneticians weird?" And his mother, marvelous woman, his mother said, "Yes." And she passed that on to this marvelous man. And he said, "Yes, and weird comes from the Gaelic, W-Y-R-R-D, and means magical." Are all Unitarians weird? Absolutely. Magical, because we see to the heart and we recognize that's what matters. And we hold the values of respect and appreciation and acknowledgement and encouragement to becoming who we really can be. And we honor this horrible system that's called the democratic process. Winston Churchill, right? It's the worst, it's the only thing. It's the worst system out there, but it's the best we've got. Yeah? So the morning after, I got the election results at 1 a.m. on Tuesday. And I was able to sleep. Had no problem sleeping. And I paid attention to that because I was a little concerned about whether I could survive this at one level. But I also knew that elections pass, right? This was an election. And the election itself does not define the administration, and the administration's rhetoric or the candidate's rhetoric, as we have been disappointedly proven in the past, has nothing to do with what they're actually going to accomplish. And so I was able to just set it aside and get a good night's rest. And the next morning, the first email I got was from my daughter, the author of Butterfly Soup. And it said, "In case it's helpful, I'm telling my friends, we need to focus on the microcosm now and let the macrocosm be whatever it is. We need to focus on what's here now. The love we hold for each other, the people around us who are ready to hear or see or get a little bit of a seed of something new, because we are weird. We are magical. And if they turn to any of us, they know they're going to get something weird." And I think that's beautiful. Yes. We can focus on the microcosm. We can focus on the strengthening the community and strengthening each and every one of us in our knowing of what is true, in our values as Unitarians, which are, in my opinion, the values of the emerging culture that is going on around us all the time while the empire falls apart. We're just watching it fall apart. We're going to see this guy named Elon Musk go in there and say, like he did at Twitter, 80% of you out the door. Well, do you know there are places in this country, states, where 75% of the income is federal payments, federal salaries? 75% of the whole state income is federal salaries? Now, that's going to help rip apart the empire pretty quick. On the other hand, it may actually affect how we can function. We may become more efficient. I don't know. And I really also know that in my day-to-day life, it doesn't matter. And if someone comes to me and says, "I had this federal job and it fell apart," I'm going to go, "Oh, ow, let's create a life that works for you now." because apparently that one wasn't the life that works for you now. So what we're going to be seeing over the next however long it takes with whoever actually shows up is something that we have never, ever, ever seen before, except it'll be more of the same. More of the same old, because it will be the empire falling apart. That way of thinking, that way of being, the institutions that support the idea that people should sit in a desk all day, the institutions that support that someone should sit at a factory machine all day, the institutions that say a child should sit in a classroom all day. These are institutions that do not support human development. There is that kernel of truth in what these people are trying to do. And we need to focus on human development and focus on the fact that right now, over 300 million people on the planet are living the values that we hold dear as Unitarian Universalists. 300 million. And when that doubles, that will be sufficient. We will have tipped the tipping point. And at the rate of expansion in our culture today, the exponential growth that we're getting, that doubling must happen in the next 5 years. So possibly even during the term of office that this current administration or the about-to-be administration has been put in, they will see everything that they thought they were holding together completely falling apart and being replaced. In the way that King George saw that happening 250 years ago, 75 years before all the other monarchs saw it happening. The world is splitting. The old world is falling away. We are the new world, right here. We are it. In our love, in our openness, in our acceptance, in our caring about this planet and about each other and about people on the other side of the planet that we never met. We are the new world. We are the flame. And when we hear those words, hold on, it's not hold on to the past. Please never, ever, when catastrophe hits, try to hold on to what was. Because that just makes it harder. We are holding on to the vision of who and what it means to be fully human. And of a world in which being fully human is not only possible, it's the norm. The norm. Imagine that world where everyone holds the awareness. They reason as well as read and write and calculate, right? They're aware of what's going on around them. The hypnosis of the last 75 years has got everyone in tunnel vision. Every now and then I'll hang out with someone in that world, and maybe we'll be driving down the road or something, and I'll be seeing this and that and the other thing, and they got no idea this is happening around them because they've been so thoroughly trained in this tunnel vision. Hold on to a way of being that includes awareness of the world around us. Yes? Hold on to your children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren and their grandchildren being able to walk through a forest that hasn't been cut down to stumps. Because we all know what a few of us have known now. For me, it's 35 years since I learned, and I learned from people who've been doing it for 30 years, that it is possible to grow plants, trees, like Douglas fir, with selective harvesting. You do not need to clear cut, and it doesn't work. But the people who are trained to work in the timber industry are trained to think you have to clear cut timber, Douglas fir, in order for it to grow. They honestly believe that because they've only got this vision. They haven't looked. What comes up for me is to share with you that one of the people that I work with in Southern Oregon learned this about 15, 20 years ago, and she hung out with one of those guys who knew it for 30 years when I was learning it. And she started acquiring all of the land she could around her. She was a bookkeeper. That's her only skill. She was a hippie. She is a hippie. And she built a little business helping people by being a bookkeeper. And if she had a little extra money and they needed a little extra money to get started, she'd help them get started. So, and then if she got a little money out of that, then she would buy land. And she would plant trees, or she would harvest trees according to the selective harvest method that Orville Camp, who was her instructor, taught her how to do. She now has 300 acres of Douglas fir and oak. And when the fires hit Southern Oregon, the smoke was so bad, and it came right down almost into her town, they stopped at her forest. They just stopped. Because she didn't have 30-foot high underbrush. She didn't have a lot of dead wood sitting around. She had a properly managed forest, the way the Native Americans did. And in fact, she is the one responsible for the salmon ceremonies happening in the Rogue River in Southern Oregon. A year after the fires, the local ranger station called her and said, "Would you mind being a trainer to show people how to do this?" Yeah. That's just one person. And look what she did. All of that. A couple decades. She ignored the empire culture, corporate capitalist greed model, and lived these values that we hold dear. In India, some of you may be tracking this, in India, the British way of farming that works fine in Britain destroyed the land in India. And when the Brits were there, they converted everyone to their way of doing things, and the land was more and more destroyed. And so when the monsoons came, the rain just went over the top of the soil and out to the ocean. Someone figured this out about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and began to teach people how to restore water catchment systems around their villages. And lo and behold, when you do it right, the water stays and the water table grows, and then you don't have to rely on the monsoons for the only water that you have, and it doesn't all go into the ocean. And these villages began to be thriving communities again, and people weren't running away into the city to follow the corporate greed model of the advertising, right? And then someone said, I'll bet we could get some more villages to do this. So they created a prize. And the prize was, of these 40 villages, who was going to get the furthest along in this process this year? This year. And it takes about 6 months to set these up if you've got 100 or so people. And most of these villages have between 100 and 1,000 people. And so they would get to work, and they would set up water catchment systems, 40 villages a year. Guess what's happening to that land? It's beautiful. It's now becoming a place where people can thrive where they were dying. Because one person figured out how to teach a village how to do this. He's a really lovely little man. A little bit, I think he's even shorter than I am. Thousands of acres restored because one person said, we could do it this way. You want to try it? And a few people followed with him. This is the culture that is emerging. a culture that honors how nature works, which is what Ralph Waldo Emerson started with in 1832. Honor how nature works in us, through us, and around us. Ignore what's going on in the macrocosm. We don't need them. And they don't want us. And we will quietly create the culture that will survive as the empire dissolves around us, because we are the seeds of that culture. It's not about what's happening in Washington, D.C. Ever. Ever. Our own personal histories have taught us that. It's always about what's happening here, and the community we are building, and the way we live, honoring each other, honoring this beautiful planet, and honoring generations to come, living in this new world that is emerging because we are here now. We are the last generation of the empire. We are it. Yeah. And our job is to be so cleansed of everything we were taught by the empire that future generations don't have to be stained by that. I think that's really part of what the whole Star Wars thing was about, to help us see that and know that. It's who we are. It's where we are going. It's who we are becoming, this new world. When 2012 was happening, I wrote a little book I called Make the World Go Away. Some of you read it. Make the world go away. Get it off my shoulders. Say the things you used to say before empire. Yes, and make the world go away. Thank you very much.